What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a video about early access games, and a little bit, at least, about how I'm also kind of exhausted with them. Which, to be fair, I know a lot of other people are as well, which is kind of why I decided to make the video. And I know that because every time I do a video about an early access game, I inevitably get comments stating exactly that. So I figured why not discuss it a little farther. I find this overall to be a bit of a frustrating situation because I do think early access can both be really, really great and at the same time can also be really, really bad. And the vast majority of people just kind of want to hopefully get the game to the finish line so they can enjoy the full and finished thing, which is where the exhaustion with early access comes in, because I think games that launch into that can quickly find themselves in a place that feels a lot more like work than it does fun, which I'll touch more on in just a moment. I figure why not go ahead and start out with the most positive things. Obviously, at its best, early access is, I think, a net good for the games that actually make the most of it, the ones that use it to gather feedback, make changes based on that feedback, catch bugs, generally try to make the game better, etc. There are clear examples of this. Baldur's Gate 3 is an obvious one. It really made the most of its time in early access, even if it was a very lengthy process. You've got the upcoming game, No Rest for the Wicked, which launches fully in October. It launched in a very rough state, has been through some very rocky ups and downs, and yet, at the same time, it is, I think, a much better game now than when it released. And long story short, when it is used for its intended purpose, I think it can be a really good thing. Unfortunately, a lot of the times it is simply not. In fact, on the worst side of things, it's borderline a scam. Because for every great success story like that, there's unfortunately a lot of games that fall into the opposite end of the spectrum, where they usually don't wind up actually ever getting finished. Sometimes they are just straight up abandoned, sometimes they're pulled from the store. And this can be for any number of reasons. Like just over the course of the past few years, we've seen things like New Arc Line, which is probably finished, Beast, which is a TRPG that's pretty much over, Project Witchstone, which just straight up got pulled from the store after their funding collapsed. And so there's just plenty of potential for things to go wrong, sometimes things that are outside of the developer's control, sometimes things that were perfectly within their control that they just failed to execute upon. And you combine those varied circumstances and even the games that just have like a normal run through early access and wind up releasing and it's just fine. That happens too. But you take all of those circumstances and what you're left with on the player side of things is having to try to parse through what is actually going to wind up being good and actually get released versus things that might never come to fruition, and also balance against that how much you want to pay for and be involved in the development of that particular title, which is where it starts to feel a little bit like work at times. Now, Steam rightfully tells people when they look at an early access game on the Steam page that those games are inherently not complete. That is what early access means, and if you're not wanting to play it right now, you probably shouldn't buy it. And that is a sentiment that I very wholeheartedly agree with. I also appreciate that on that same box of text, they have started adding little notices and things if early access games go for a really long time without updates, just to help clamp down on some of the worst sides of this. But that sort of loops back to the actual intention of early access as a system, which is that, in theory, you should be getting the game for less, getting to play it early, and then provide your feedback and everything. Now, I think something that is becoming more prevalent as time goes on is that there's just so much stuff competing for everyone's time all the time that the exact same reasons that developers want to put things into early access becomes the reason that a lot of people on the player side of things probably want to avoid a lot of it. That being, of course, getting all of that feedback and playing through multiple iterations of something. But again, you combine that with the fact that nobody really has time to often play through a single game multiple times over various iterations over the course of its early access journey, unless they are just absolutely enamored with it, which does happen sometimes, to be fair. But even within that, you also get people who just don't want to spoil the game for themselves, so a lot of times what they'll do is buy early access when it releases, play a little bit of it, and then kind of just shelf it until it actually launches into 1.0 and they can experience it all fresh without having to effectively spoil themselves with something they can't actually finish at the moment. And that is a lot of talking and mental hoops to jump through in comparison to a game just releasing and being done and you getting to experience it. it, and I can understand then why it's pretty easy to find early access off-putting. And that's before we talk about the fact that it's just kind of becoming a more popular option for developers. Or at least it certainly feels that way. To be fair, I don't have the actual numbers, but it really does kind of feel like we're just tripping over early access titles here recently. For instance, just games that I know have launched into early access this year off the top of my head. You've got Prelude, Dark Pain, Heroes of Might and Magic, Olden Era, Solasta 2, Menace, Windrose, and Fatekeeper. I think there's probably more than that, but that seems about right, just kind of listing it off from memory. And several of those games are not exactly small. I mean, Fatekeeper's a little on the shorter side, but the other ones have a good chunk of content in there, and to be expected to play through that multiple times over the course of, again, however long it winds up being in early access isn't exactly a small order when everything else is constantly happening around you. But I also said that early access games can feel a little more like work, and that's probably at least a little strange to hear from somebody whose literal work is to in fact play video games, and that's fair, but that's not quite what I mean. You see, if you actually want to have any sort of impact on an early access title, you need to in fact play it and provide all that feedback, and that is what I try to do via my own videos. But you compare that with doing something for a review, and it's just a little bit different. So when I'm playing a game for a review, in theory, it is at the very least its 1.0 version. It might not necessarily be its final version, but the release build, if you will. And the intent there is to go through and just enjoy the game for what it is right now. Whereas with an early access game, I know it's inherently not finished, and it changes my approach to that game to be more, what is wrong with it specifically, and how could it be fixed, and how can I relay that feedback to a team that I am not actually involved in any way, which is usually, again, kind of how I think through some of those early access videos. But that's just a slightly different process in a way that feels, again, just a bit more like work than my normal work. And if it feels that way for me, I can only imagine what it feels like for people who don't actually play video games for a living, which is the point of where I'm going with this. And so when you start to put all of that together into a singular, clear picture, it just becomes a lot, honestly. So while early access is certainly a good thing for developers, and it can be a good thing for players as well, provided that they actually get the game for cheaper and it has a successful run through early access and doesn't wind up costing them money for a game that never releases, as an example. But regardless of all of that, the fact of the matter is there's just a lot of early access games. They're all competing for your time. Whether or not they're successful is all over the place. Some of them fail outright. It seems to me that the ones that need to do early access specifically for funding are usually the ones that fail the most because of its unfinished state. Even if you do find one you enjoy, it can just be a little more work than a normal release. And just compare all of that to the simplicity of something simply releasing and you play it, and it's, no small wonder that it just gets to be exhausting with how often we're seeing these releases. Even if it is obviously a little more complicated than just that. Now, to be honest, I don't expect anything about this to change. I'm mostly just expressing a little frustration, I suppose, but at the end of the day, it can, again, be a really good thing for developers, so it's no small wonder it's a popular choice there, and then sometimes it really does work out and you actually have a really enjoyable experience with it. And obviously there's games that I'm going to play a ton regardless of whether or not they're in early access, like when Divinity comes out. But sorting through all of them can certainly be a lot, and to be fair, that is specifically why I make the videos, to hopefully make that easier for people. My goal with basically every early access game that I cover is so that people can make an informed decision about it and decide if it's something they want to actually check out, or, simply keep up with the videos until it launches. And I think simply providing people that information so they can make those choices is one of the more useful things this channel actually does outside of the reviews, and something I obviously continue to plan to do, but they can be a little exhausting, and I just wanted to talk about it for a while. But that is pretty much going to do it for this particular video. Certainly hope you enjoyed it. If there's any early access games you're absolutely in love with, or I guess if you just feel the same way, by all means, let me know all about it down in the comment section below, which of course means to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.